My talk, which is probably about 15 minutes or so, maybe into 20 minutes, is called Chicken Farms, Impacts on the Lumbee Tribal Community and Environment. And I wanted to start out with some photos here. These are things you've probably noticed at your own house if you live around Robeson County or in southern Hope County. One is a truck full of chickens going to their place of rest, either Sanderson Farms, Mountain Air, or some other chicken processing plant. The middle picture is a truck passing chicken manure over fields. And there's various types of machines, I believe, that pass manure, that spray manure over fields. But this has become very common around this area to see that. And then there's a photo out the kitchen window at my sister-in-law's house of flies collecting on the window after chicken manure has been sprayed in the local field. And the flies lingered around the house, around this window, for about 3 days before a cold front came in. But even after the cold front, the flies were still there. This is something I didn't notice at all. I never saw it 10 years ago, 15 years ago, especially 20 years ago. About 10 years ago, you began to smell the scents of chicken farms. And you began to see more flies. So that's what this conversation is about today. I'll introduce myself again. I went through my credentials earlier. My research has been funded since 2009 by the National Science Foundation. I'm currently writing a book called Lumbee Pipelines, which is not just about the Atlantic Coast Pipeline and various different types of gas pipelines around Robeson County. I actually make an argument that we as Lumbee people live in different types of pipelines, educational pipelines, healthcare pipelines, and that those various types of pipelines define how we live our lives and it defines our community and their collectivity. I'm on the board of directors also, just for clarification. I'm on the board of directors of Winyah Rivers Alliance, along with one or two other Lumbee people who also are on that board. My previous visit was about a year ago. Well, not a year ago. How long was it? A little over a year ago. I think in spring of 2019, or the summer of 2019, where I came to you and I had a lot to say. And I think there's notes from that meeting that the secretary of the council could probably share with you. But there's several notes that I really want to kind of express here that came out of that conversation. I carry a fly swatter in my car everywhere I go in Robeson County. When I'm driving my car through Robeson County, I have to have a fly swatter because the flies are in and around the car year round. That's just how many flies exist in this county. And they're coming from the chicken farms and the associated manure that's being spread around the county. We Lumbee folks have profited from neglect, and this is a longer conversation that I touched on in that conversation a year ago, but that I'll touch on tonight. Some of us are chicken farm owners. Some of us own what they call CAFOs, which are chicken feeding operations that are corporately owned, and they're created to produce as many chickens in as short amount of time as possible. And then the third point that I touched on then that I'll touch on again now is that the state of North Carolina doesn't support our community's health. Roy Cooper, in my estimation, may be our biggest enemy. From a political standpoint, he's taken money from Duke Energy, and he's done nothing through the Department of Environmental Quality that he helps host, done anything to protect our county, our tribal community, from various toxic realities. So that sets up this conversation today. So since that conversation I had with you all in 2019, I've noticed a lot of things. This is a video. I hope this plays. I was on the front porch at my sister-in-law and brother-in-law's house in Saddle Tree, and I noticed after manure had been spread on the window that there were flies. So I said, let me go up here and see just how many flies are on this window pane. So as you can see, I'm slapping the window, and these flies are coming off. And that day I killed probably about 100 flies on the porch, I believe. This window right here is at the McDonald's, one of the McDonald's in Lumberton. And I honestly, until this year, I've never gone into a restaurant and noticed flies like on the menu where you're ordering a sandwich or at the drive-thru as you're going through to get a sweet tea from McDonald's. But pretty much 80% of the time, if I look around at around the edges of the window at a drive-thru, there's flies, and there's lots of them. In this case, there was probably about 5 flies that were kind of flying around this window. So, all right, with that being said, this is an official conversation that I have for you written down, and I'm going to go through it, and then I'll stick in my personal thoughts as I'm going through what I pre-wrote for this presentation. Again, thanks to Wendy Moore and other folks of the Tribal Council who are actively working to address the highly toxic realities around chicken farms in Robeson County and adjacent counties. Since I spoke to you last time, I've continued my research and advocacy. You might recognize my name from a recently circulated video from an organization called Mercy for Animals. I spoke about the danger of chicken farms for the health and environmental stability of Robeson County. One of the examples that I used in that video was the way that flies from Robeson County farms are affecting the education of Lumbee children. My niece just the other day stated on her own, I didn't push her to say this, she said, "Uncle David, I can't concentrate. These flies are aggravating me." So while I have been smelling the stench of chicken farms in Saddle Tree, for example, since the early 2000s, it's honestly getting worse. As chicken production has ramped up across Robeson County and local farmers are using the waste of chicken farms to fertilize their ground, citizens of Robeson County are faced with a 12-month cycle of chicken feces, or whatever other word, crap, poop, whatever word you want to use to describe the substance, and the pests that go with it. I recently took a video of my family's house, which I just showed you.
Mr. David,
yes.
Excuse me, but there is someone who's not muted who is making a lot of fuss. Could you please mute your mic, please? Thank you, Mr. David.
All right. So I recently took the video that I just showed you of my family's house in Saddle Tree after a farmer placed chicken waste on the local field. The flies were everywhere. I stood on the porch and killed about 100 flies in about 30 to 40 minutes. And I counted them, but I didn't get all the flies, so there were many more to kill. And since 2009, I've been studying toxicity in Robeson County and southeastern North Carolina more generally. When Hurricane Matthew came through in 2016 and we were subsequently faced with the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, many Lumbee folks, you all and people around your community, began to consider their environment in new ways. Yet, I firmly believe that Lumbee people are stuck in a mode of thinking that equates chicken farming with just farming in general, that makes us Lumbee people feel it is necessary to make the new age of corporate animal husbandry, which are these chicken CAFOs, fit into our memories of farming as a tribal community, perhaps when we were children or younger. This is dangerous thinking. Mount Air, Purdue, Sanderson Farms, and other corporate chicken houses are not the friends of Lumbee people, and in fact, they prey upon the desire of Lumbee people to relive the good old days of tobacco harvesting and raising hogs and chickens on the roads between Pembroke and Roland and other areas of the county. But our tribal memories might be a little foggy here. Before the Environmental Protection Agency ever became a thing, so this is the arm of the U.S. government was created to protect our environment. Before it was created in the 1970s, the use of pesticides were controlled by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Agriculture was a term that didn't merely mean planting crops and harvesting them, which is usually how we use the word. It meant to control humans, to basically see humans as part of the landscape. Yes, certain humans were seen as part of your agricultural landscape. In the 1950s, local farming corporations such as the Pates and the Biggses here in Robeson County pushed their Lumbee farmers to use DDT, which was a pesticide in their fields. There were economic advantages to using DDT. For example, sharecroppers, which most Lumbee people were given extra profits from the crops they harvested if they used the DDT that was coming again from the Pates and the Biggses. However, the health disadvantages were many. Lumbee farmers saw birds falling from trees in large numbers. I've talked to countless folks who lived around the county who saw that when they were younger. Foliage around swamps began to change in color and appearance, and the fish, actually, there were testimonies that fish began to taste different. A lot of people back then ate fish out of the river. On a national level, we have countless photographs of Mexican immigrants who were being sprayed with DDT as they crossed the borders. Their bodies were being sanitized. But by 1962, a book titled Silent Spring documented the dangers of DDT, and as a result, DDT was less and less used. However, the damage, which wasn't talked about by Lumbee people, by people who controlled Lumbee farming, or by the North Carolina or U.S. governments, was done. So damage was done. Neurological damage and cancer became so present in our community that by the time of the Vietnam War, when Lumbee soldiers came back with symptoms resulting from being sprayed with Agent Orange, Lumbee folks were used to it. And I actually had an uncle whose neurological functions became so decrepit that his body literally choked itself from exposure to Agent Orange. But again, a lot of people in our community were they weren't surprised by this. They had seen it before. So even though this level of torture may have not been present in the age of DDT, not to the extent that Agent Orange created damage, we must consider how Lumbee people were targeted by DDT in the 1950s and early 1960s. The end result was their silent deaths from leukemia, skin cancer, breast cancer, stomach cancer, and lung cancer. And a 2019 study by the University of California actually showed a link between DDT and diabetes. So I'm going to ask a question here. Have we been told that we have diabetes because we're Indians, because we're American Indians, because we're sort of predisposed to it, when in fact we might have diabetes in larger numbers because we were poisoned, because we're in the American Indian community? Just think about that. So agriculture isn't an innocent space. It is a space where corporations and governments have consistently exposed humans to the agents of agricultural engineering for the sake of profit and power. There is no coincidence. The 1950s and 60s was an era of eugenics and the utilization of public health to clean certain ethnic populations. Some of our women here in Robeson County were given hysterectomies or were otherwise sterilized for no reason. They disappeared to places like Dorothea Dix, so much so that when I arrived in Robeson County in 1991, it was very common for one Lumbee person to tell another Lumbee person that they were going to get them sent to Dorothea Dix. It was kind of like a joke, but it wasn't a joke. Lumbee people had been disappearing there for decades. This was part of a much more sinister political project to evaporate American Indians from the political landscape of the United States. And if you remember the KKK rioting of 1958, people were surprised that we had done all that to defend ourselves against the KKK because they're like, where did Indian folks come from? Where are these American Indians people hiding? So I bring all that up because I asked this question: what were the conditions of this silencing of American Indians? Why were people so surprised to hear from us in 1958 when we rebelled against the KKK? And why are American Indians generally silenced across the United States? Well, the silencing has been largely agricultural and environmental. In the Navajo Nation in New Mexico, and you can see this map that I've put on the screen here, the U.S. government hijacked Indian land to bury toxic waste. If you've ever heard of Bikini Atoll, which is an island in the Pacific area, the Pacific Ocean, the military used indigenous islands in the Pacific, in particular Bikini Atoll, to test atomic bombs. And in the upper Midwest, American Indian communities such as Lakota were placed into areas where plants could not easily grow. Simultaneously, they were force-fed commodity foods that literally poisoned their body. Now, I bring this up to today. Fast forward to today, no longer are we seeing birds falling from the sky, at least not to my knowledge. Rather, we are seeing birds, chickens in particular, cancerously groomed in farms that are largely non-regulated. And the chicken farms are not an isolated reality. It is not as if we can get rid of corporate chicken farms and all of our problems will go away. Chicken farms in Robeson County are part of an environmental snowball effect in which unregulated CAFO construction aligns with unregulated spreading of chicken waste on farmers' fields, which aligns with quickened deforestation. Have you noticed all the trees missing in Robeson County? That's a serious question. Have you noticed it? This isn't just about landowners needing extra money or extra capital. The opening up of spaces makes it much easier for energy companies laying gas pipelines to increase numbers of largely unregulated chicken farms to do their work. This is a critical intersection for the Lumbee tribal government. This is why I speak to you all today. I know that some members of the tribal council work for corporations like Mountain Air, whose profits depend on Lumbee people remaining silent on issues of poultry, toxicity, and gentrification. This is part of a larger history of Lumbee people often selling things around us for profit, not realizing that the health of our tribal people and the health of our bank accounts may depend on different points of view. What makes you wealthy may not make your neighbors healthy. So I'll say that again. What makes you wealthy may not make your neighbors healthy. Here's where this conversation falls on you, the tribal council, and the larger tribal government. The elected representatives of the Lumbee tribe of North Carolina have a mandate before them to do work to protect Lumbee people. I'm writing a book now called Lumbee Pipelines, and I discuss how differing points of view are actually unique pipelines within which we as Lumbee people live. So what are some of these pipelines? Some of us are devoted to church work and mission. Some of us are devoted to education. Some of us are devoted to healthcare. Some of us are devoted to working for Lumbee EMC. And we are politically and in every other way connected to the business of Lumbee EMC. So one of the most fascinating aspects of our tribal government is that our tribal government sort of exists between all these different pipelines. You have no say in public education. The work of the Lumbee EMC sits underneath the grasp of Duke Energy, so you have no say in that. Lumbee missionaries and church leaders do everything to heal other communities, and they largely don't heal people here in this community. Healthcare providers are often unable to effect the healing that they dreamed about when they were trained to be a healthcare provider, so they get lost in the mix. So the members of the tribal council, you all, who work for a chicken corporation, may say, well, I'm sort of tied to my job, and that may cause a conflict of interest. So you're not going to quit that job, probably. So what I want to point to here, is that you, the tribal government, are possibly the only unifying force in the world of the Lumbee people. You speak for Lumbee people, and with Lumbee people who exist in other different realities between these different pipelines. So you basically see Lumbee life across these different experiences, and you can connect them. So as such, this is, and I wanted to point out on this slide, this is from Waterkeepers Alliance, and they're showing you, if you look down in the bottom right-hand corner, there is a astronomical growth of chicken CAFO farms in Robeson County as compared to other areas of North Carolina. The other counties are Duplin, Sampson, and Sampson County, but compared to the rest of North Carolina, chicken farms are growing at 33%. Compared to 17% in other areas of North Carolina since 2012. So the growth of chicken farms in Robeson County is astonishing. So what I want to point you to is this. This isn't a time for the tribal council to constrict and become more conservative with opinions and advocacy. You can't make decisions because your cousins work for UNCP or work for Mountain Air or serve in some other role that may conflict with the decisions you need to make for the tribe. It is time for you to protect the sovereignty of Lumbee presence and health. It is time to name and demand action against what is wrong in the Lumbee community. So last year, and I just want to bring this up because I think it was an important point that I didn't really get to address in the moment. Jan Lowry, who isn't on the tribal council anymore, last year told me that I didn't understand what it means to live in Robeson County every day and to deal with the politics of living here. However, whether I am here or not, I'm a good assessor of how the Lumbee worlds work. The local chicken farm corporation, Mountain Air, as with Sanderson Farms and others, is like the famous drug dealers of New York in the 1970s, as they seek to utilize the Lumbee community as a source of profit. As they look to push their chicken operations on Lumbee people, they pander to Lumbee community leaders. A box of chicken here, a few $1,000s here. Recently, and my father-in-law is on the school board, and I told him I didn't like the idea that it was happening anyway, but what do I know? Recently, Mountain Air worked out a deal to send a large sum of money to the public schools of Robeson County. This is similar to the times when drug dealers in New York would park a semi in the middle of the Bronx and hand out turkeys for Christmas. And some of you might have seen that in some different mafia movies. I think the drug trafficking model is a great way to contextualize the encroachment of chicken farming in the Lumbee community. The work of Mountain Air to build a relationship with the people of Robeson County by pushing chicken money into local schools is an attempt to humanize Mountain Air, as it is wreaking havoc on Lumbee breathing and other senses of health and well-being. Mountain Air donations also hide the complicated ways that Mountain Air serves as a linchpin, and this isn't just Mountain Air, it's Sanderson Farms and others too, as a linchpin for the degradation of Lumbee environment. So I wanted to ask you a question. Did you know that Mountain Air and other chicken corporations provide excuses for Lumbee Energy, for Duke Energy and Piedmont Natural Gas to tear apart sacred Lumbee swamps and do damage to Lumbee water sources? Yes. Indeed, as land is opened up for more farms, as the Lumbee tribe goes from being the land of the pine and dark water to the land of wide open spaces and absolutely disgusting water, Robeson County becomes conditioned into the minds of Lumbee, North Carolina government and U.S. government regulators as the go-to place of waste for North Carolina and southeastern United States. Meanwhile, neighbors can't maintain any privacy anymore. Back in the 1990s, you couldn't see anyone's house for all the trees. Now, I hear traffic from every direction in Saddle Tree. Wild dogs run rampant. Wildlife, such as bobcats, are seen much more regularly. The swamps, meanwhile, are doing more work to clean water than they should be because the water doesn't have anywhere to go but flow across the landscape and land in the swamp. And the swamp should have trees and foliage around it to support the work that it does to clean water. This isn't natural or normal or acceptable. So, finally, what should be done? There ought to be a moratorium on the building of chicken farms and other CAFOs, again, other corporate operated feeding operations and most of them are chickens. So there should be a moratorium on the building of chicken farms and CAFOs in the Lumbee tribal territory. This should be a decree from the full Lumbee government, from the tribal council and from the administration. Meanwhile, the energy and resources within the Lumbee tribal government that are being placed into the pageantry of things like Lumbee homecoming and maintaining the image of the turtle and such ought to be redistributed into achieving environmental health for the entire Lumbee community. The former tribal administrator, and she's gone now, was an environmental scientist. Why wasn't an environmental study done to assess the disappearance of Lumbee land, trees, and water? Meanwhile, the tribal government, as I requested a year ago, should take an official stance against dirty energy. And the largest example is the LNG, the liquid natural gas facility in the Wakulla area. It's that big dome being built, and it's going to be filled with natural gas soon. And related industries whose only purpose is to use Robeson County as a site of waste disposal. Again, part of Duke Energy's justification for bringing huge gas infrastructure into the Lumbee community are the growing number of chicken houses. They're using the chicken houses as an excuse to wreak havoc in our ecosystems. And meanwhile, the people who kind of half own the chicken farms, some of whom are Lumbee people, don't get the way that the energy infrastructure and the chicken corporations and are kind of work together to damage Lumbee land and Lumbee environment. So folks who turn this conversation, and I want to speak to people who may be naysayers in this conversation, folks who turn this conversation into a defense of jobs and industry, who suggest that fighting for environment will somehow make Robeson County less competitive, are utterly ignorant of what real industry is looking for in the post-NAFTA era. So once the NAFTA kicked Commerce and all these other plants out of the area, any corporation that comes in here that actually wants to do good, they're looking for certain things. Good corporations are looking for good schools and clean, structured play areas for the children. They're looking for stable local leadership that focuses on keeping track of matters at home. They're looking for an average age of death that is much higher than the average age of death in Robeson County, which means basically we have to create an environment where people can live in order to get things in the county that will allow people to live. So one of my main points, and I have it at the bottom of the slide, is that we must de-Pembroke Lumbee tribal intervention in the area of agriculture. This is not the time to create a facade around the Lumbee community. The first time I saw all the houses that were built behind the turtle, I wondered if they were built there to give outsiders the impression that we Lumbees exist huddled together. And I know, we all know that Lumbee folks enjoy our land and our space, right? That's how a lot of us grew up. We grew up apart, but in the same area at the same time. Nevertheless, the work of the Lumbee tribe ought to be as much on Highway 211 going into eastern Robeson County and in the region around Roland and Dillon as it is on Highway 72 and 74. This is what I mean by de-Pembroking this whole conversation about agriculture and environmental protection. It is time for the Lumbee tribal government to get out of its Pembroke-centered political inclinations and begin to consider how the various aspects of environmental and agricultural degradation that I have described up to this point are reasons to speak as a sovereign entity. And again, this goes back to this whole idea of we've sort of not talked about as a community the ways that we've been poisoned before, and we need to get to talking now in a very serious way. Thank you so much.